Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Whitwam Organics Weekly Nursery and Garden Report. I'm your host, David Whitwam. Thank you so much for joining me. And I also wanted to say I had a great weekend last weekend. I went to Bob's Berries, set up a market for his grand opening of his blueberry season. And I just wanted to let you guys know I had a blast. It was wonderful meeting all of you. And I just wanted to tell you how much I appreciate y'all coming up to me and telling me how much these videos are doing for you. Sometimes it's kind of difficult. You know, you're on this side of the camera. You really don't know what's going on over there. And I just wanted to let you know, each and every one of you that came up and said hi and thanked me for doing these videos, how much that really meant a lot to me. So I'm going to keep doing these if you guys are going to keep watching and keep learning. So we are going to talk about a few things today that I would by no means call myself an expert in, but I do have experience, and that is some terminology that gets used a lot. I believe it gets thrown around a lot more, and that's talking about vegetables and fruits as an heirloom versus a hybrid versus a wild, a volunteer, and open pollinated. So, oh, everybody's commenting. Hey guys. Hey Pickles. Hey Michael. Thanks for tuning in. Before we get into that though, I do want to run through a brief nursery report with you. We are in a pretty big transition right now with moving out of the winter crops and kind of waist deep in the spring stuff and just getting our toes in the water with some of our summer stuff. So the summer stuff is all planted. It's coming up. We haven't really gotten to pot a whole lot of it up yet. If you wanted to check out our summer list, that's you can visit it on our website. It's under the heat loving greens and things. That's if you're just getting started, whether it's just getting started for the year or just getting started in general, I highly recommend you check that list out. Most of the things on that list are super easy to grow for most, if not all, of the summer. A lot of different stuff. It's not just the old used list of sweet potatoes and peanuts. We've got a lot of really neat stuff on there, so make sure you check it out. The spring stuff. So a lot of what we have as far as spring stuff goes in the nursery and out in the garden are all pretty big plants by now. That would be your tomatoes, squash, the eggplants, peppers. I mean, I was hesitating because eggplant and peppers, at least the types that we have, are summer crops as well. But most of your regular, terrible word to use because the others are regular somewhere else, regular eggplants, so Black Beauty eggplants, what most people see at the grocery store, those do enjoy a little bit more of a, like if they were producing right now and you had them, they'd be super happy. Like they like this weather that we're having right now, just really comfortable, not too hot, not too cold. Watermelons. I want to bring this up really quick because this is a really perfect example of why watermelons can get really tricky. Most varieties of watermelons, they like it really hot. I'm going to throw corn in here too. They need a really high soil temperature. And as lovely as this weather has been late winter and spring, it's been a little bit too cold to get good germination off the seeds. And even if you did, they could be struggling a little bit. Not so much on the corn, more the corn with the germination on the seeds. But with the watermelon, they really do like it hot. Now, here's the challenging part. When we have a year like this, and if summer comes early. So basically, if the winter weather kind of lasts a little bit too long, and then the summer weather comes a little bit too early, that can really squash some of the season on some of these plants. So we got our fingers crossed. I've got watermelon in some gardens that was put in 6-8 weeks ago, and it should be taken over a corner of the garden by now, and they're only, yay big. So as much as these cooler nights, I've really enjoyed them because it's extended the season on a lot of our winter crops. Some of the spring crops, it really hasn't been cold enough that where they're like struggling, but they're not growing as fast as they could be. So this is one of the challenges of what I would call your spring crops and your fall crops that like, perfect warm weather is if it stays a little too cold too long and then it gets hot a little too early, it can really squish our season. Same thing in the fall when we plant the stuff again. It stays hot a little bit too long and gets cold too early. I believe that happened this last year. Our fall season can get squashed. If you're a new gardener and you wanted a bulletproof garden, I would recommend going straight from winter crops. That would be anything that could take a frost or a freeze. So a lot of leafy vegetables, root crops, and then transition straight into summer crops off my heat-loving greens and things list and skip right over the spring altogether. Take a couple week break, try and get an early start on your summer stuff, try and extend your winter stuff a little bit longer, whatever you got to do, but just kind of skip over that spring. Here in Central Florida, spring stuff is generally planted somewhere between January, February, and March, and is grown obviously through spring and early summer. In my opinion, these are the crops that are going to give you the most problems. I mean, like right now, you might be having some problems with your winter stuff, but that is to be expected because it's getting warmer. Just like in the fall, when it starts cooling off, you might be having some issues with your summer stuff. So that's not really a problem. That's more just seasonality. So if you want a really easy garden, you transition from your winter stuff straight into your summer stuff and skip the spring and fall seasons, which are kind of overlapping seasons that, really kind of need the perfect weather, which we're having right now. Like right now, we're having the perfect weather for a spring garden, for the spring crops, but who knows how long that's going to last. So summer stuff that we have going, just to give you an idea of what we're talking about, that would be okra, a lot of our Asian melons, Italian Roma tomatoes, Everglades tomatoes, Floridade tomatoes, a lot of herbs, Korean squash, avocado squash. I'm going to butcher this one. If you've been watching, I'm not too good at pronouncing, but I'm gonna look it up first. T-O-T. I pronounce it tatame. I was told that's not the right way to say it. So pronunciation. But tatame squash or pumpkin is a Mexican squash that was actually bred to be eaten at all stages. It's an heirloom that's a couple thousand years old. And for those of y'all who are new to this game and don't know what the heck I'm talking about, most squashes and pumpkins were bred to be eaten at one stage. So like, let's take zucchini, for example. That is bred to be eaten early while the seeds are still soft. So like green, you're eating it green. Yellow squash, you're eating it green before the seeds develop. Some are developed to be eaten kind of mid-stage. So I would kind of throw your acorn squash in that category. And then others, like a butternut squash, they are really meant to be eaten when they mature and develop all the way. Yeah, I didn't think there would be anywhere that told me how to pronounce that word. It's T-A-T-U-M-E, and I'm going to pronounce it tatame. I apologize if I'm butchering it. T-A-T-U-M-E. It is a Mexican pumpkin. delicious, and you can eat it all stages. That's kind of my main point. So you can harvest it small, like a little round zucchini, and they taste great. You can pick them off the vine when they're fully grown and still green, and it has a lighter, little bit mealy texture, like an acorn squash. And then you can also let them mature all the way. It has that stronger, more pumpkin-y flavor, like for baking and stuff like that. I absolutely love it. It is a vining squash. We also have our ahubak, Aehobak, Korean squash. Now those are meant to be eaten early, like a zucchini, but it is a vining plant. It's not in the same species as a zucchini, and it, in my opinion, shows a much greater disease and pest resistance, and it produces so much more of these nice, bright green, buttery, delicious zucchinis. I had at one of my gardens last year in the fall, I had in a 4-foot by 16-foot bed, I had planted 5 of these plants. In another bed, in a 4 by 16 bed, I had planted zucchinis on either side of the bed every 2 feet. So 16 zucchini plants of my desert zucchini, which does great, produces very, very well for a zucchini, powdery mildew resistant. The ahubak squash bed outproduced the desert zucchini bed 4-1. So I would go back to this garden every single week and harvest and take the produce to the school down the street, and 5 plants outproduced 16 plants 4-1. So it is absolutely amazing. I highly recommend, if you have the room, to plant this vining zucchini. I'm just jumping all over the place here, guys, because my ankles are getting eaten alive by these mosquitoes. So just excuse me. That is, I highly recommend that. We also have an avocado squash, which is also a vining one. As far as the size of the plant goes, to the amount of fruit you get off of it, it's not as impressive. But the avocado squash's flavor, whereas the ahubak is incredible, the avocado squash is amazing. I mean, it literally tastes like you already put butter on it when you cook them. But you just don't get a whole lot per vine. Now, granted, a lot of these vining squashes that I grow, one of the other reasons why I grow them is because I don't have to stay on my A game as much using a pest control product like Bacillus thuringiensis or BT for the caterpillars. I still use it, but I don't use it as much on my bush type squash. The reason why is because it's if I don't use it on my bush type squash and they get a bad infestation, the whole plant is toast. On my vining ones, if I'm not really on it all the time, if I'm kind of more visually looking for pressure and then applying, the plant will still survive. It'll get attacked in a spot, and it'll just keep vining out new growth. So maybe if I treated them as much as I treat my bush style, they would produce more, because as my experience is, the caterpillars usually attack the female flowers first. So but not really heavy producer in my opinion. But those are 3 great picks for squash for mid-spring through summer and into fall. The tatame, the avocado squash, and the ahubak Korean squash. If you want squashes and zucchinis, that's the way to go. I'm not bringing up Seminole pumpkins and calabasa because most of y'all already know about those, but definitely a good one. Also, in my opinion, you don't get a whole lot for the size of the plant. So make sure you got the space and definitely got the time, because they do take forever, but that's usually a pretty easy one and a decent producer. Um, the good news is with the calabaza or Seminole pumpkin, by the way, so like all Seminole pumpkins are considered calabaza. And then there's a lot of different, I guess, cultivars of calabaza, depending on regionally where they were cultivated. You know, Puerto Rico, Mexico, Dominican Republic, Florida, the Seminole pumpkin. So they all have a little bit, slightly different shapes. I'm seeing more and more people just kind of throwing around the term, calling everything that's calabaza a Seminole pumpkin. In my opinion, that's not necessarily true, because it's my understanding that some of the tribes down in the Everglades have been keeping the line of the Seminole pumpkin pure, and that's where the real Seminole pumpkin seeds come from. Anyway, I didn't mean to get on a side note with that. I just want to kind of go through some of my favorite squashes and pumpkins for the summertime. But check out the list, the heat-loving greens and things. My information, our business information, is all over our website. If while you're on there you have any questions, if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to one of us, and we'll be more than happy to answer them. Yes, Kenny, the Ahobot grows through the summer. Yes, it produces very, very well all summer long. I don't really have any other highlights I want to talk about. Get into our topic and talk about the kind of the different terminologies, like when you're buying seeds. So there's a couple terms that I didn't put in the title of this. Trying to pull it up so I can remember the order I said them in. I think I can remember it. I think it was what was it? Volunteer, right? Wild. I'm actually remembering the dogs in the picture. Volunteer, wild, heirloom, open pollinated, and hybrid. And so the types of dogs, that's very important. So first we have, it didn't come off in the picture, but that first dog had two different color eyes. That's a mutt. And the second one obviously is a wolf. So it's the first one, that's your volunteer. Second one is the wolf. It's obviously the wild. The third one was the German Shepherd. That kind of represents your heirloom. The fourth one is a pit bull, and that represents your open pollinated. And the last one is a cocker or something, cocker poodle or cockadoo or whatever they are, the designer dogs. That's your hybrid. So what are the differences between those, types of dogs? The first one, the volunteer, the mutt, that one just kind of came about. There was really no intent. It could be a combination of many different breeds, many different mutts. That would be like kind of the equivalent of something just coming up in your compost pile. I love the dogs as an analogy, because in gardening there's a lot of crossovers. So follow me on this. You guys are more than welcome to pipe in the questions and stuff if you have any questions or comments about what I'm talking about. Again, I'm by no means an expert in this area, but I believe I can bring some clarity to this stuff for some of you noobs out there. And I'm gonna get through these definitions really quick, because what I really want to get into is the differences in kind of the good, the bad of these different I guess types of genetics. So your volunteers, just like with mutts, those can make some of the best pets. Those can make some of the best plants in your garden. Those could be some of your best tomatoes that have the least disease problems. It's typically something that just kind of wild got pollinated and ended up in a spot. And what you probably don't see are the number of seeds that didn't germinate and didn't like that spot. And what you probably didn't see is maybe the seeds or the plants that did germinate and begin growing that didn't make it. So by the time you usually run into a volunteer, you're kind of already a few steps down the road of selecting the best of the best. Not all the time, but there's a pretty good chance. So volunteers are a lot of fun. Sometimes flavor-wise, you don't exactly know what you're going to get. Just like when you get a mutt, you really don't know what their personality is going to be. But more often than not, you're pleasantly surprised. So next on my little picture there is the wolf. So wild. Obviously, those are things that naturally exist in nature. And I'm going to tell you right now, as far as what is in our diet, hardly anything falls in this category. I got a good handful of y'all watching right now. If you can think of any, put it in the comments, because I have been thinking and I can't really come up with anything. So wild, that would mean there was like at least a version of it out there that we eat or could eat regularly. I'm not going to say that. I'm not going to count it as wild if there are varieties out there that have been cultivated, but I would have to say that the wild version would need to also be regularly eaten. Like one that comes to mind would be like pawpaw. Right. So yes, y'all are doing a great job. So herbs, elderberry, poke salad, blackberries, blueberries, pawpaw. There's definitely some, but not a lot. Like what I'm trying to get at is like, I wouldn't count wild cabbage. If that's still around, it still exists, but it's not like almost everything that we eat from that is not the wild type that's all been cultivated. Purslane, you guys are doing great. There's a big list, but compared to what we eat regularly, like what makes up our diet, it's a very tiny list. So y'all get it. Now, wild, let's talk about something really quick. This wasn't on my list, but wild does not mean I would say does not mean that it can't be intentionally planted, and it obviously does not mean, well, obviously some people could think it doesn't mean it's native. So in other words, Penelope brought up purslane. You could go get purslane and not selectively breed it, and transplant in some garden somewhere else that it doesn't belong, where it's not native, and I would still consider that to be completely wild. So I'm not necessarily talking about like completely wild, like you're foraging for it in the wild. I would say I would still count it if you are intentionally planting it for edible purposes, and it's pretty true to its original genetics. So we had the mutt, and then we had the wolf. Oh, next, the German Shepherd. So the German Shepherd, that's going to be, well, let's skip that one. Yeah, we're going to skip that one. We're going to skip the German Shepherd. We're going to skip the Pit Bull, and we're going to go straight to the Cockadoo, or whatever that thing is. So that's going to be your hybrid. If anybody is familiar with that breed, it is a first generation mix between two different breeds of dogs, and it's bred for a specific purpose. Well, it's got a few purposes. They're cute. They got a great demeanor, but a lot of those are hyperallergenic for people who have allergies. So there's a real specific purpose for that mutt. It's an intentional mutt, basically. So that's your hybrid. Your hybrid plants are two. Well, we'll get into the next one really quick. Those are two open pollinated breeds of dog that are bred together for very specific traits. So that would be in your plants, like an F1 tomato that's bred for nematode resistance. So next would be your open pollinated. So these are still breeds that of plants. Breed's not the right word. It's cultivars of plants that were bred by people. They were made by people. They were genetically, oh, I almost said it, because they were genetically engineered by people. And however, the genetics are like, they've done enough generations of them over and over again that the genetics are deeply in that cultivar where they're considered open pollinated, meaning to get children just like the parents, you can rely on natural means of pollination. So bees and wind, or even just people, pollinating them. Whereas a hybrid, usually it's a little more involved. Like it's separating off, especially in plants that have the male and female parts on the same flower, the self-pollinating flowers. They might even need to go in to the flower and cut the male parts off the flower so it doesn't produce pollen, and then get the pollen from the other type of flower or other type of, say, tomato, and they pollinate it, and then they get the fruit, and then they take the seeds, and that's your F1 generation with the traits that you're looking for. So the hey Scott, better late than never. The open pollinated has just basically been bred and bred and bred and bred and bred. So you can breed two of the same plant together, and there's a really good chance that almost all the children of that plant are going to be have the same traits as the parent. So whereas with a hybrid, like let's say you took a cockerpoodle and a cockerpoodle and you bred them together, you're probably going to have, I'm just going to throw some stats out there. I believe it's like 80% or something of the children are going to have traits that resemble, I believe, one parent or the other parent or a grandparent, like leaning more toward one or the other. And then like 20% or less could have closer to the traits of, I'm sorry, yeah, if you took a cockerpoodle and a cockerpoodle and you bred them together, you're going to have a higher percent that are going to have traits like the grandparents. And then a very, very small amount are going to have traits like the parents. So you're basically not guaranteed, if you breed like and like together, to get the traits of the parent. So that's a hybrid, an F1 hybrid. And whereas open pollinated has been bred, the genetics have been bred enough into it that you can save the seeds from the plant and plant it and probably get the same thing. So that leaves us to the last one, heirloom. Heirloom is kind of a fake word. It has some meaning, but I think there's a lot of wiggle room in exactly what it means. But generally speaking, it is just a very old open pollinated breed. Some say 50 years, some say 80 years. But so there's really no difference between open pollinated and heirloom other than how long they've been recognized as a cultivar. So do you like the way I did that? I chose the German Shepherd and the Pit Bull, right? So they're just as much of a breed as far as their genetics goes. So that Pit Bull is representing an open pollinated plant, and that German Shepherd is representing an heirloom. So there's really no difference between them other than the amount of time that they've been recognized for having solid genetics and solid traits that you'll get when you breed like with like. So that kind of compartmentalizes all of these definitions. Now, the biggest one that I really want to talk about is the pros and the cons of heirloom, open pollinated, and hybrid. I already kind of touched on the pros and cons of the wild versus volunteer. The wild, you know, I think that's pretty self-explanatory. If you're getting something wild from the area that you're in, it's probably a native. So that's a really, like, we have things growing here in Florida, well, anywhere, that are wild and are invasive. So they're still just as wild as something that's native, but they're considered invasive because they're not supposed to be here. So don't be that guy. Don't go get something from somewhere else and bring it in here and get us another invasive species. But if you're getting something from the wild to put in your garden, and it is from your area and it is a native, chances are it's gonna do pretty well because, well, I mean, I think that's self-explanatory. We talked about the benefits of the I keep losing my train of thought. I've got all these pictures of the dogs in my head, and I'm trying to keep going back and forth between the plants. Yeah, Scott, the mosquitoes are pretty bad out here today. He said I need to reach for my DEET spray. The volunteer plants, or the mutts, we already talked about what their benefits are. Their benefits is by the time you kind of find them, the chances of the whole survival of the fittest for your location game has already kind of naturally played itself out. I think the biggest area that people have questions, and definitely where there's the most marketing thrown at them, is between heirloom and hybrid. So we've already determined that open pollinated and heirloom are the same thing, except the heirlooms have been recognized as a cultivar variety or whatever for longer. That's really the only difference. It's having superior taste or having this thing or all the other gimmicks and marketing that go behind an heirloom. It's still not a requirement of heirloom. Those are all just marketing gimmicks. The reason I chose the German Shepherd for the heirloom was because the example I want to give you. Okay? So just because a German Shepherd is a purebred dog, heirloom breed, right? It doesn't mean that that's the best dog for you if you work 60 hours a week and live in a tiny apartment. So at some point, these heirlooms and even an open pollinated fruits and vegetables were a hybrid. And they were hybridized, they were cultivated, they were developed for a specific reason or set of reasons, or for a certain climate or a certain region or a certain flavor, whatever, what have you. So that doesn't mean that the heirloom is superior. In fact, I think it's what trips them up, is because they're marketed as superior this, superior flavor, all these different characteristics that may be applied to the Northwest 80 years ago. So pest problems change, diseases, develop, They become resistant to stuff. They attack other things. The blights that we're dealing with right now aren't the same blights that we were dealing with 80 years ago. So kind of the things that they market that make heirlooms superior, in my opinion, is their Achilles heel. And hybrids tend to have been bred for some extremely specific purposes. So in my opinion, and now open pollinated are just, they've just kind of gotten the genetics. So let's call open pollinated, it's such a great word because it's kind of like they're open sourced. Hybrids, a lot of times they have spent a lot of time and money on research and developing these hybrids, and there's really no legal way for them to patent them. So they will kind of keep the formula close to their chest as far as how they got to those hybrids. And they definitely won't keep breeding them so that they can be open pollinated, I'm assuming, until they've gotten their research money back. I mean, I'm not going to go as far to say greed, because when you put a lot of time and research and money into something, that, you know, that you should be able to recoup your investment and make money off. Like, I get it. I don't mind buying hybrid seeds, because I know a lot of work and research went into it. I know I'm not developing my own hybrid stuff, and the traits that they usually come with, that you can select for that particular vegetable, they could really be meeting your needs. So buying the right hybrids, not just jumping to heirlooms because they're heirlooms or because they have superior flavor. It's kind of, well, no, it is one of the first steps to organic pest control. So when we've talked before about the pyramid of integrated pest management, and down here at the bottom are cultural changes and environmental changes to your garden. So choosing hybrids over for pest resistance over heirlooms because they're stripy or have some other different, you know, thing about them, or just because it says heirloom on the bag. I literally heard somebody say on the face of the book the other day that they don't buy anything but heirlooms because they're superior, and that's demonstrably false. Heirlooms are not superior in any way, shape, or form intrinsically because they're heirlooms. It's just not true. If anything is superior, at least in my opinion, in my world, it would be the open pollinated stuff, because a lot of the open pollinated vegetables were still bred and developed for extremely specific purposes. They're not as old as the heirlooms, so a lot of the reasons that they were developed are still applicable, and they're kind of open source. They're you could save the seeds and have those traits still remain. So that's basically it in a nutshell, guys. Oh Lord, I put my glasses on and started reading these questions. I don't know if I want to. Okay. Okie dokie. Corey, 2 cultivars of varieties bred true to seed because they've been isolated geographically or selectively bred. Crossing 2 of the same species that have those differences creates hybrid vigor or heterosis. This is Corey's one of the people that when I was saying in my introduction that there's some people that know a lot more about this stuff than I do. And Corey's one of them. The plants of this cross will express strong beneficial traits of both parents, but the vigor often quickly falls away with the next generations. What were you referring to on that, Corey? Please, if you could put that in the comments specifically. You said two cultivars or varieties bred true to seed, so open pollinated. They've been isolated geographically or selectively bred. Are you talking specifically about what is a hybrid? They've been isolated geographically or selectively bred, crossing two of the same species that have those differences creates hybrid vigor or heterosis. I think you're just giving the more scientific definition of hybrid, I believe. Let me know if I'm right. Parents, but the vigor often quickly falls away with the next generations. I guess if you're defining vigor as the specific traits that, okay, the hybrid vigor, which would be the specific traits that you bred it for, quickly falls away. So Kenny Gill says to follow this chat up with this documentary. I'm going to show it. There it is. Hey, Kenny. There's Kenny's picture. Kenny's been a guest on our show. For those of you who maybe this is your first video, he's been a guest on twice. One of the last recent ones, Kenny Gill, not Kenny Coogan, a couple of weeks back. And then he was my first guest on, I believe, way back in the day when I first started some 33 videos ago. So Kenny says follow up with that YouTube video. I'm going to die if it's just something goofy that has nothing to do with this. That would be my sense of humor. Kenny's a pretty serious guy when it comes to stuff like this. So I trust that this is actually a video where we're going to learn something. I would probably post a video that's like something really dumb. All right. Location. Scott Smith says, same with drugs. I'm not sure what that means, but seeds for profit, all about F1 seed industry. Okay, that's the video, is seeds for profit, all about the F1 seed industry. You know, and I didn't really want to get bogged down in this, but I think it is still a good idea to bring it up. I don't want to go down this road too far, but GMOs or genetically engineered GEOs, depending on where you look, there's a few different definitions of GMOs. God, where'd that link go? Oh, there it is. And what I mean by that is there's a definition of GMOs that these open pollinated, the hybrid, and the heirlooms would fall under, because they have been genetically modified. They are not volunteers and they are not wild. So whereas the genetically engineered are just that, the genetics of it is engineered, whereas your hybrids and your heirlooms and your open pollinated were just modified by selective breeding. So selective breeding is what we're talking about. Selective breeding under some schools of thought fall underneath GMO, and then under some schools of thought, and what I think most people think of when they think of GMO is the genetically engineered stuff. So I don't want to go that far down that rabbit hole. We'll talk about it someday. I got to be mentally in the right frame of mind for that. You just reminded me the name of your video, Kenny, Seeds for Profit. There's a really good Hollywood-esque movie about GMOs and the big companies behind the seeds. I know your movie's that all about F1 seed industry. This movie is specifically about the GMOs, and it's called At All Costs, and it is very much a Hollywood movie. So there's a lot of entertainment, a lot of drama that has nothing to do. But in the background, the story being told is spot on accurate about the plight of the farmers with big ag and big seed. It's got some big actors in it. I highly recommend checking it out. And especially if you have a group or people that you want to lightly, kind of sneak in the conversation of GMOs and where the real danger lies, in my opinion, but I'm not going to go down that road. But check it out. It's called At All Costs. Kenny's got a movie for us to watch called Seeds for Profit, and it is all about the F1 seed industry. Well, folks, I'm going to go and have dinner and probably watch this movie tonight. So thank you, everybody who came on and joined me. Next week, I'm going to have a guest on. I'm not too sure. Wait, what's next week? What's the date? Today's the 21st. So we got 2 more weeks before. Make sure I got this right. Okay, so I'm not going to have a guest on next week. It'll just be me sitting here yapping my gums, because the following week I have Kenny Coogan back on, because that is international. I think it's not national. I think it's International Carnivore Plant Day, and Kenny's one of the big dogs in that whole circle. And check it out. So I didn't know this, but we have some native carnivore plants, as well as a lot of others. So we're talking about like pitcher plants and Venus flytraps and stuff like that. What are the ones called that are native? Not honeydews. I think they just like have a sticky thing on them or something like that. Like they don't have a pitcher, like a pitcher plant. Anyway, Kenny will be on May 5th, and it is International Carnivore Plant Day, and I'm excited to have him back on. He's launching a business of specifically targeting carnivorous plants. So he'll be on May 5th in a couple weeks. So next week, if you have any topic suggestions for next week, anything you want me to cover, garden questions, please send it to info@whitwamorganics.com. If you have a general topic that you want me to cover next week, if you just have specific garden questions, send them to that email, info@whitwamorganics.com, and I will answer your question while I do my show next week. So thank you, everybody who joined me. Thanks, Michael. Thanks, Scott. Thanks, Kenny. Everybody else who hopped on and said hi. Hey, Barbara. Thank you for loving my seeds. And I look forward to seeing you guys again next week. Have a good night, everyone.